Hey babe, I love you. What up book lovers, it is G-Swizz here and I'm here today to talk about some hate to love romances. It is a 7 on Sunday topic. I am the host of 7 on Sunday. If you want to participate in a topic in the future or suggest a topic in the future, there is a GOODREADS page where you can participate and join in the fun. This week's topic is a very popular one that we all in the bookish community on the internet like to talk about. And yes, of course, there are a lot more underrated bookish tropes or romance tropes that I personally do like. I personally find it underrated, but I love friends to lovers as well. But a lot of people like the enemies or haters to lovers because it just brings a lot more dimension to the story and it kind of forces you to get to know these characters and why they hate each other or why one side is not as they seem over time. I find the concept very fascinating. When it comes to hate to love romances, it's kind of valid for one side, for example the protagonist, not to see the perspective of the other person or like where they come from generally. I like those kind of hate to love romances because they're forced to get to know the love interest as well as we are. So I guess without further ado, let's get started. I'm bringing up one some people love, some people don't. It's understandable, and this series is very romance centric, so I understand why a lot of people are turned off from the series because they either hate or love the romance. And that, my friends, is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I made reference to it earlier. Here's the thing, I don't necessarily think that Hawke is the best love interest ever. The thing is, when I first read about him, I was just like, what on earth is going on? Who are you to all of a sudden come into the protagonist's life and think that you can all of a sudden just be with them after everything? Poppy has every right to hate you. I thought to myself upon second read how fascinating it is to go from a character who was meant to be on the bad side, not meant to be on the bad side, but was meant to mess with not Poppy as an individual but Poppy as the maiden and be that kind of antagonistic figure, but all of a sudden being a character who gets to know not the maiden but gets to know Poppy. I liked that. I've read From Blood and Ash 2 times. I've read A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire 2 times. The angst in A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire specifically, I found it to be like, ugh. The reason why I say that is because Alistair keeps on throwing spanners in the works and I am not okay with it, but yeah, that's a whole nother discussion there. But I do find the dynamic absolutely fascinating. So that's why a lot of people don't necessarily want to give Hawke a chance. Hawke is an acquired taste, I'd say. He's definitely that kind of snarky character who not everybody loves. It kind of makes sense why a lot of people don't like the ship that much. This being said, I do think that Poppy deserves happiness, and while I do think that she can also find happiness on her own, I love the fact that Hawke is doing everything he possibly can to make it up to Poppy. I do understand why a lot of people are very skeptical about Hawke and will not give him second chances because of his original intention. As I mentioned, he got to know Poppy. It's been a good time so far. He's a good character. I really just have to appreciate Poppy. She's one of my favorite characters ever, one of my best protagonists I've ever read about, and someone I can personally relate to. I want her happiness, and being that I connect with her, I'm actually fine with her and Hawke. Kind of ship them, and I kind of like the dynamic. I find it very fascinating. As promised, I don't know if I promised it necessarily, but I did put it in my recent TBR video. This week, I ended up binge reading the Cruel Prince trilogy. Really funny, looking back at my original TBR video when I was like, I don't know why people ship Jude and Cardan. I now understand why. I read The Queen of Nothing, and I remembered as I was reading The Wicked King and as I was reading The Cruel Prince, I started to think to myself, wow, Cardan's actually not as bad as I perceived him to be, because I didn't actually genuinely understand how he was raised, or I didn't really take the time to get to know Cardan. I always just saw Cardan as an antagonistic figure because the first 2 times I read the first book, I would read it kind of from Jude's perspective and think Cardan's a terrible person. Jude hates Cardan, therefore I should hate Cardan. And now I understand why he's actually, I was just about to say decent human being, but he's technically Fae, so no. He's technically a decent ruler, especially when you read The Wicked King and you realize he kind of does have a moral compass. Rereading the series, it blew my mind to realize that they are kind of a shippable ship. That being said, the hate to love dynamic in here is really good. It's very well done, I'd say. And I understand why a lot of people do find The Queen of Nothing to be a finale that's not as satisfying. I get that, especially from a romantic sense, because you kind of want more of them after after everything that's gone on. But that's okay, I'll take what I can get. I can't talk about hate to love ships without bringing up A Court of Mist and Fury. I'm not gonna delve too deep into it because Camilo is in the room and he is reading A Court of Mist and Fury right now. So I don't want to personally spoil anything. But if you are in the book community to some capacity, I'm pretty sure you heard about this series. I'm pretty sure you heard about Court of Mist and Fury being one of the best books in the series for a specific reason and a specific character coming into the main cast and getting to know other parts of the main cast, and it's great. And it's really funny because the first time I read this book, I was very reluctant. I think a lot of you guys know this. It took me to get to chapter 55. That's the God tier chapter. Or maybe it was chapter 54. There's the backstory chapter and then there's the lovemaking scene chapter. I'm trying to remember whether chapter 55 is the lovemaking scene chapter. If that's the case, then it was chapter 54 where I made up my mind. Everyone just keeps on talking about chapter 55 because everybody is just really happy about that. I've pretty much just gone on a tangent for people who don't actually understand or have not even read the series. But it was at that point that I made my decision and I jumped ships. First reading experience of this book was personally really hard. When it comes to ships, in the first place, being attached to someone, I can't jump. But in this case, I had to. And I'm gonna be bringing up another instance later on in this video. And when it comes to the hate to love dynamic, I personally did not like the love interest in this book after A Court of Thorns and Roses at first. But he had no ill intention. I really had to look inwardly, just like when I was reading From Blood and Ash. I think that's why when it comes to the From Blood and Ash ship, I'm more open and I'm more accepting to it. I think A Court of Mist and Fury kind of helped those people who are reluctant shippers to kind of be more open to those things if, of course, the intention was not to hurt the protagonist in the first place because they finally got to know who they were. This book is actually centered around a hate to love romance dynamic because it's technically part of the plot premise. Bone Cries Moon by Catherine Purdy. I loved this book because I kind of just knew going into it that it was going to be hate to love. Pretty much Bone Cries Moon follows a protagonist who needs to end her first love. It was the Charlie Bowater cover, then it was the synopsis, and that's when I decided this book needed to be on my TBR. And I ended up really loving this book series. Ellis and Bastion, I really love their dynamic with each other. The thing about hate to love romances that I absolutely do love is when one side of the relationship believes one thing is right, the other side of the relationship believes something else is right. It's them having to come to a common understanding of this is right and this is wrong. Ellis, she has been told her whole life that she needs to sacrifice her first love in order for the gods to bless everyone and to make sure that people are going to the better side of the afterlife, essentially. So that's what she believes in. But then Bastion, having his father sacrificed at a very young age, he's like, no, this is wrong. Like, you guys are literally sacrificing people here and now. But what I like about that is that they come to an understanding, and Bastion, or a character who's like that in another hate to love romance situation, comes to an understanding that that is how they were raised, therefore they have to do some unlearning. They kind of give them grace to some point. I like that about hate to love romances. From Blood and Ash is a perfect example of this. The unlearning trope in book series I love because it makes for a great hate to love romance, but also it makes for a good reflection of what life is actually like. There's tons of unlearning I have to do. I just find it very fascinating when I get to see that in a book. The next romance dynamic that I'm going to be talking about falls under a similar category. Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. Now, this one also follows some religious themes, kind of similar but kind of not to Bone Cries Moon. Bone Cries Moon kind of follows more cult-like themes, whereas the Serpent and Dove situation, Reed is kind of in this church that believe in a certain way. And then Lou also comes from a witch's coven that believes a certain way of life as well, to the point that they plan to sacrifice her life and then she runs away. That's pretty much the plot of Serpent and Dove. But Reed is strictly against the life of witches, and Lou is trying to run away from her witch life. He ends up bumping into Reed, and then all of a sudden they're forced to get married. It's a forced relationship. Therefore, Reed obviously has resentment based on the situation. And at first I didn't really like Reed, but I could kind of understand where he was coming from, because as someone who grew up in an evangelical background, not everything was great. I don't want to delve too deep into that. I'm just gonna say that broadly so I don't offend too many people. No, my past was my past. Please don't judge. What I got out of his story the second time I went into reading this book was that Lou had to give him many chances, but also Reed had to give Lou some chances as well because he was taught a certain way. Lou is a little bit of a step ahead. Like, she is very understanding of Reed's situation, but I love the fact that the entire trilogy centers around Reed's deconstruction, and I find that absolutely fascinating. Their love is very strong in the end. I don't hate it. I think that this hate to love romance was really good. It was an unpopular opinion at first that I actually didn't ship them originally, but I do now. To some degree, it is realistic because some of us do have to unlearn in order to be the happiest in certain relationships, and I'm really happy that they found happiness and Reed was able to deconstruct in a way where he could make room for Lou. And I've got to talk about Crave by Tracy Wolff. I did mention when I was talking about A Court of Mist and Fury, when it comes to love triangles, I really attempt to jump ships, okay? When I get attached to a character, for me, unfortunately, it's over. I mean, no, I was a lot more open-minded, and then I read Crave. It was difficult because I actually got attached to Jackson. And here's the thing, Jackson hates his brother, and his brother makes an appearance in the second book. And that's when we get the love triangle dynamic. So yes, I'm gonna be talking about Grace and Hudson, and I'm gonna be talking about them as one of my favorite dynamics. The reason why I like them so much is similar to the other hate to love romance dynamics that I've talked about. Grace has been taught a certain way. He's pretty much been given Jackson's perspective this whole time on Hudson, and he would always pretty much talk bad about Hudson, and we all collectively as readers were meant to hate Hudson. And then Hudson comes into the second book, and we actually get to know the dude, and not everything is as it seems, and I like that Grace is unlearning. Crush, I think, is the book where she's super snarky with him. She comes to realize that Hudson is actually willing to know her, but also sees her potential better than Jackson does. Up in the air, people can ship Grace and Jackson. That's cool. I did once too. I did. But Grace and Hudson, they're my everything at the moment. Final book series that I'm gonna mention is a book series that I had no idea, one, had a love triangle, but two, had a hate to love dynamic. And I don't usually like to go into books with love triangles. Maybe that's why I actually don't find out that they have love triangles until I read them, and I'm like, oh, dang it. Crave was that example. With the Conspiracy of Us trilogy, did not actually anticipate this to be a love triangle whatsoever. It was hinted at in the first book, but not like really delved into. In the first book, you meet this character, and he is the funniest dude. And he annoys our protagonist at every turn, but also he's super flirtatious. And I'm thinking, yeah, you know, this dude is actually really funny. And then like you've got the, you know, the main love interest that was kind of like the high school crush and stuff. Both love interests kind of come into the picture at the same time, but you don't realize that one character is going to be a love interest until, I think, here's the thing, it ends similarly to From Blood and Ash. I'm trying to not spoil this, but it ends with a similar sentence in the way that From Blood and Ash ends, and that's when you realize, oh dang it, there's a spanner in the works, this is gonna be a love triangle. And then the second book kind of explores that. What I do like about the series is that even though there is a love triangle, it doesn't necessarily take away from the story. I do love the story. I don't usually read in this kind of genre, but what I do know is that it just made for a very entertaining time. Therefore, I feel like the hate to love romance kind of just engaged you even more. There were times where I thought to myself, oh my god, I really love the romance, but oh my goodness, I love the plot. I never wanted more of either. I liked how everything balanced out together. I guess that's gonna be it for this 7 on Sunday today, book lovers. If you happen to enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet already. Join the amazing community of book lovers. And also, I have social medias. I'm at GSwizzleBooks on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm also Goodreads. That's www.goodreads.com/gswizzle. I love you, book lovers, and I will see you later. Peace.
Started out with half and I flipped it in a double. Started out with half and I flipped it in a double.